Hey everybody. Yesterday I talked a bit about the book Surveillance Valley by Yasha Levine. Today I'm going to talk about the next book. Yesterday I described these 4 books that I've been reading as a series. They're only a series in as much as I read them in a particular sequence. They're not any sort of official series, although I might refer to them that way going forward. So the second book in the series is The Age of Surveillance Capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff. This book is as long as the other 3 combined. There is absolutely no way I could possibly do it justice in a 5 to 10 minute video. So really, I'm just going to introduce 4 concepts. And these 4 concepts are all introduced, or at least mentioned and expanded upon a little bit, in 3 paragraphs that come very early on in the book. So under the auspices of the communicative strategy of tell them what you're going to tell them what you told them. Let me first introduce the 4 concepts that this brief reading will introduce. They are surveillance capitalism, the title of the book, probably an important concept, right? Next is the concept of behavioral surplus. This is a big one in terms of understanding Zuboff's message throughout the book. Basically, all of the behaviors that you and I get up to in a day, most of them, they're not quantitized, they are not transformed into data, but more and more of our daily lives are being processed into data, which can be fed into learning algorithms. But for now, most of what we do isn't a behavioral surplus, but pretty much everything we do with a smartphone or with a tablet or with a computer, or if we're wearing a Fitbit, then our every motion, our every heartbeat is turned into data, which is collected in large databases and combed through by learning algorithms which find patterns and correlations which no human mind could replicate or could find without the assistance of artificial intelligence, so-called. Next is instrumentarianism or instrumentarian power. I think she only uses the word instrumentarianism once or twice in the book. Usually she says instrumentarian power, and this is a type of power. It's different from political power or military power or economic power. It is power that is granted to those who control the devices, which gather our data and which comb through it algorithmically to find correlations that human minds can't find unaided. And finally is the concept of behavioral futures markets. So before I go any further, let me just say that when I first took in this book, I took it in as an Audible audiobook. But yesterday I went back and I bought the Kindle version, and I've started the book over reading and listening. And the reason for that is there were certain things that I missed early on in listening to the audiobook, and she refers to instrumentarian power probably hundreds of times over the course of the book. And because I was a little fuzzy on what she meant by it, I kept always wanting to go back and find the first instance of that phrase. But with an audiobook, it's just not easy to do. This book is big enough, long enough, rich enough, and I would say substantial enough to warrant study as opposed to just, a pass-through, which is what, just one listening is. It's a pass-through. It's an introduction to the material. To really get at it, you're going to have to listen to it multiple times, or better yet, read it. But instrumentarian power and behavioral futures markets were 2 concepts that I really wanted to go back and review. And I'm still a bit fuzzy on the details of the behavioral futures markets. But we'll come back to that. So the reading. Again, this comes very early in the book. According to the Kindle pagination, this is from page 7. What is surveillance capitalism? Surveillance capitalism unilaterally claims human experience as free raw material for translation into behavioral data. Although some of these data are applied to product or service improvement, the rest are declared as proprietary behavioral surplus, fed into advanced manufacturing processes known as machine intelligence, and fabricated into prediction products that anticipate what you will do now, soon, or later. Finally, these prediction products are traded in a new kind of marketplace for behavioral predictions that I call behavioral futures markets. Surveillance capitalists have grown immensely wealthy from these trading operations, for many companies are eager to lay bets on our future behavior. As we shall see in the coming chapters, the competitive dynamics of these new markets drive surveillance capitalists to acquire ever more predictive sources of behavioral surplus: our voices, personalities, and emotions. Eventually, surveillance capitalists discover that the most predictive behavioral data come from intervening in the state of play in order to nudge, coax, tune, and herd behavior toward profitable outcomes. Competitive pressures produced this shift, in which automated machine processes not only know our behavior, but also shape our behavior at scale. With this reorientation from knowledge to power, it is no longer enough to automate information flows about us. The goal now is to automate us. In this phase of surveillance capitalism's evolution, the means of production are subordinated to an increasingly complex and comprehensive means of behavioral modification. In this way, surveillance capitalism births a new species of power that I call instrumentarianism. Instrumentarian power knows and shapes human behavior towards others' ends. Instead of armaments and armies, it works its will through the automated medium of an increasingly ubiquitous computational architecture of smart, networked devices, things, and spaces. Okay, so the concepts again. Surveillance capitalism. Later in the book, she's careful to spell out that surveillance capitalism is not synonymous with the machines used by surveillance capitalism. Surveillance capitalism is an economic use which dictates the particular direction in which the machines are developed and deployed. So we can have an internet. We can have information technology without surveillance capitalism. Behavioral surplus. Basically, just going through the motions of our lives, doing the things that we do, creates this flow of data. And the assumption of surveillance capitalism is that that data, even though we generate it, does not belong to us. In fact, we don't even have access to it. It is the exclusive property of whatever economic entity, corporations say, can lay hands on it and manipulate it. Which leads us to concept number 3, which is instrumentarian power, which is basically the power to do things based on, technology and methodologies and systems which have been, laid in place surreptitiously, but also very quickly. And finally, behavioral futures markets. There are lots of companies. I mean, the easiest things to imagine are like insurance companies. Insurance companies want to know how we're going to behave because they are basically taking a risk on our behalf in exchange for some monetary consideration. But what we pay, our insurance premiums, are far lower than the amounts that the insurance companies might have to pay out on our behalf. So they want to know how we live our lives, how we will behave in the future. But this emphasis on predicting our behavior naturally leads into, well, the best way to predict behavior is to determine it. So surveillance capitalism just naturally and rather quickly morphs into behavioral modification or social control. And while the immediate goal of surveillance capitalist activities is to make money, the ultimate effect is to create this vast, sprawling, invasive system of surveillance and eventually of behavioral control. So we could have a very, politically progressive government structure, but a totalitarian, instrumentarian structure which supersedes government, which basically interacts with our lives much more directly, much more continuously than government does. All right, so that's basically just a few concepts from the early pages of this almost 700-page book. So this will not be the only video that I do on this book, but this is the first pass and the introduction of a few key concepts. I will talk more about this same book tomorrow.